listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
I'm being alert. I'm staying alert. In fact, I've been alert the entire day and I haven't seen one single virus go by. But that's the government's new message being adumbrated right now by the Prime Minister Boris Johnson. His was pre-recorded. My responses will be live, and we're giving over the first hour of the show to your response also. So get your calls in now. I'll be responding minute by minute to what Boris Johnson has to say, and I want to share your responses with the country and with the world. Britain is now top of the worst league ever, the league of death. We have the highest number of deaths per million population of anywhere in the world. And guess who's coming right up behind us? No, it's not Donald Trump's USA. It's Sweden, the liberal wet dream, the wet dream of every libertarian lunatic that has been salivating about their devil take the hindmost approach to the coronavirus. Britain, over 6 per million citizens have already died, and that's despite the severe undercounting of deaths in the community and deaths in the care homes. But we'll also be talking about a remarkable rewriting of history over this weekend. It turns out it was the G.I. Joes that liberated Berlin. It was their flag that flew over the rubble of the Reichstag. Fasten your seatbelts. This is a radio show with pictures, and tonight it's certainly going to be the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
Here's the poll, episode 47, poll number 1. Did the Prime Minister's message make you feel A, safer, B, less safe? You may feel you can answer that already before he's even gotten into his stride. I know that I probably can, but you can vote now and onwards on my Twitter feed. And as I said, we'll be taking calls all the way to 8 o'clock. We're giving over the first hour of the show to the rapidly developing situation on the coronavirus in Britain, as well as the world. I mentioned earlier that we are top of the league you'd least like to be at the top of. We have more deaths in Britain per million subjects than any other country in the world. Sweden is second. The United States is third. China is, of course, at the bottom of the league, the only league you'd ever wish to be at the bottom of. This is the mother of all talk shows. It's coming from London, but it's speaking to you all over the world, thanks to the wonders of the internet and SputnikNews.com. But you may be watching as well as listening to this show. 502,000 of you watched the show last week, and many of those were on Facebook. And if you're watching on Facebook, please share right now with all your friends, your followers, your contacts on Facebook. You can watch it on my Facebook or on RT's many portals on the Facebook platform. You can also watch on YouTube, either my own YouTube channel, and do subscribe while you're doing it, or you can watch on RT's multiple YouTube channels. You can watch on Twitter, and you can even watch on Instagram. You can listen crystal clear on FM in Washington, D.C. I know the president frequently tunes in. It's 105.5 for the rest of you who don't yet know that in the D.C. area. Or on AM across the United States from coast to coast. Well, I'm going to start while I wait for the headlines of the Boris Johnson pre-recorded statement with the rewriting of history to which I referred in the introduction. It's beyond obscene. As a matter of fact, it's almost funny that the iconic picture of the Red Army soldier lifting the Soviet flag to a flagpole above the rubble of the Reichstag 75 years ago, yesterday, has been banned from Facebook. The most iconic, one of the most at least, iconic photographs in all history has been banished. I think the rest of us should do what we can to spread it around the world, myself. Turns out that it was the Americans and the British that won the Second World War, even though 4 out of every 5 Nazi casualties in the war were at the hands of the Red Army, at the hands of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union lost 27 million citizens, a figure which dwarfs every other country on the earth except for China, which doesn't even get a look in on these occasions. The Soviet Union lost 27 million. China may well have lost 20 million people in the Second World War. But according to a tweet from the White House, not even Donald Trump's increasingly unhinged personal Twitter account, from the White House Twitter account, it said that the United States and Great Britain had won the Second World War. Well, talk about rewriting history. I know why they do it. They do it for 2 reasons. First, they have to demonize the former Soviet Union. Because what would people conclude if they really knew that the Soviet Union had been so strong that it tore the guts out of the Wehrmacht, to quote the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill? What would it say about the Soviet Union that it was able to absorb the onslaught of millions of Nazi soldiers, whilst the European governments folded like cheap tents in front of the assault of that very same army? Von Paulus, the German general who surrendered at Stalingrad, had earlier led the German armed forces into Paris. He captured France with his soldiers. What would it say about the Soviet Union if people really knew that the Soviet Union had been so great that it had destroyed Nazism, the existential threat to humanity, to civilization on this planet? And the second reason is because since the coming to power of Putin, Russia has gotten off the floor where it was lying drunk, having its pockets picked, and has begun to restore its strength, its national dignity, its unity, its cohesion, its importance in the world. Russia is one of only a few countries in the world still pursuing independent development and rejecting the incredible efforts of the United States and its allies to dictate what happens in every corner of the world. So for these 2 reasons, Russia and the Soviet Union have to be written out of the script. And these are the people who tell you about fake news. These are the people searching everywhere for bots and Twitter accounts that might just take a different point of view to the prevailing orthodoxy. When you rewrite the history of the victory of the Allies in the Second World War, if you're capable of rewriting that, you literally are capable of any lie, no matter how large. Now, Boris Johnson speaking now, he says that they have implemented measures and stopped a catastrophe. Well, I'm not sure if they stopped it. As I said, we are the worst in the world for deaths per million citizens. We have the second highest death toll in the world, and we are catching up actually on the United States of America, even though we have 68 million people in our country, and they have at least 4 times that, maybe 5 times that. Boris Johnson says it would be madness to allow a second spike. We must stay alert. So don't forget that. Stay alert. Look out for the coronavirus. He says that there is the shape of a plan, the first sketch of a roadmap to reopen society. He said he's consulted all 4 nations across the UK. He said, I believe that as the Prime Minister, there is a strong resolve to beat it. That's just meaningless verbiage. Although we have a plan, it's a conditional plan. We have to satisfy the 5 tests. To chart our progress, we're establishing a new COVID alert system. And here I have it now in hard copy. He says there will be 5 alert levels, from 1 to 5. 5 being the most critical. We're now at level 4. Why then did you change your slogan? Why did you change the color of your slogan? From red, stop, to green, go. Why did you abandon the slogan, stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives? Why did you abandon that slogan in favor of the meaningless, utterly risible command that we should stay alert? 2, most things you must do is reverse the number of deaths in care homes. And a world-beating system. We're going to have a world-beating system of test and trace. We are testing literally hundreds of thousands of people each day, he said. But that's not true. You never once tested 100,000, not literally hundreds of thousands of people each day. That is a brazen lie, Prime Minister. In time, you'll be able to detect local flares in your area. This is not the time to modify the lockdown. Why then did you brief the press during the week and produce all these headlines about Happy Monday, about the lockdown being over? And above all, why is your Chancellor set to outline brutal cuts to the furlough system, which will, of course, force people back to work in unsafe working conditions? Because, of course, there is no lockdown if people are faced with the choice of going hungry or going back to work in an unsafe environment. It's been said that the Chancellor is going to cut the furlough from 80% of your wages to 60%. But there's some reports today that he's planning to scrap the furlough altogether. Now, I hate to tell you this, Prime Minister. You weren't in Parliament at the time, but I was. Article 44 of the Employment Rights Act makes it a legal duty of workers and managers to walk off any job which is unsafe. I was one of those responsible for legislating the Corporate Manslaughter Act, which makes it a criminal offence for which the employer can go to prison for requiring workers to work in an unsafe environment. Now, if we have any trade unions left, if those trade unions have any idea of what their purpose in life is, those unions will be telling the Prime Minister right now, Our members will not be going back to work until you have cleaned the workplace, until you have made it clear and measurable that the danger to our members, your workers, has been eliminated. Now, here's more. There will now be unlimited outdoor exercise, but you must obey the rules of social distancing. That one I support. There is evidence that the sunlight and the warmth of the current weather can be helpful, not only in potentially destroying the virus, but in improving the mental health, sense of well-being of the population. I just make this plea. Can you not jog past people panting out your coronavirus breath in other people's faces? If you're going to jog rather than walk, can you put a mask on? Can you turn your face away as you run past other people? And by the way, is the Thames walkway a walkway or a cycle track? Mayor Sadiq Khan, I'm only asking. Fines will be increased on those who break the rules. After June the 1st, some shops and primary schools will open. Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, is at the front of demanding a return to work, an exit strategy, he calls it, and he's demanding that the schools be reopened, even though that would send the virus running amok in the schools, amongst the children, and amongst their families when they come home from work. By July, says the Prime Minister, we will hope to open at least some of the hospitality industry and other places. Yeah, it's a pity you hadn't stopped the horse racing. It's a pity you hadn't told the Cheltenham Festival that it couldn't go ahead. It's a pity that you hadn't told Liverpool Football Club and the European football authorities that they couldn't play the game between Liverpool and Atletico Madrid, the clue being in the name Madrid, which was even then under lockdown. It's all conditional, apparently, according to Boris Johnson, but it will soon be the time to impose quarantine by air passengers from abroad. What do you mean it will soon be the time? You have been allowing flights from New York City, from Wuhan, from Iran to land here, and thousands of passengers from these hot spots of the coronavirus to walk through our airports and into our communities. Why did you do that? I feel about this a bit like I feel about the so-called war on drugs. There's never been a war on drugs, as anyone passing through an airport knows, as anyone watching cargo arriving at ports knows. There's never been a war on drugs, and therefore it's wrong to say that the war on drugs is lost. It never started. Neither has there truly been a lockdown in Britain, because you can't have a lockdown when you are allowing unlimited numbers of passengers from the worst affected areas in the world to freely fly into our country. We had, as we did in the Second World War, quite a considerable advantage in being an island. When you're an island, you can take a decision that people are not coming in. And that's what we should have done. And we never did it. And now we're told it will soon be the time to impose quarantine by air passengers from abroad. I quite simply don't understand that. So anyway, what's your view? Give me your calls. Here's the numbers. The UK number, 02077 982 255. If you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. And of course, you can tweet me at George Galloway. You can tweet us at RTUK, preferably add both so the RT know that there's a lot of throughput on this show. It's very important that they should know just how many people are watching and listening and responding to this show. And maybe then they'll even give us a second show so that we can be with you twice a week, maybe once in the midweek, to update you on the stories we dealt with the previous weekend. Work from home if you can, says Boris, but you should go to work if you can't work from home. Well, that's the most significant of these statements, isn't it? Work from home if you can, which is fine for people in a profession like mine. I already worked from home most of the time. But for the mass of the working class in this country, working from home is utterly meaningless. You can't do your factory work from home. You can't do your warehouse work from home. You can't work in a shop from home. You can't work in your office in most of the jobs from home. And so that statement from Boris Johnson, wrapped around with all these caveats, is the bull point. Work from home if you can, but you should go to work if you can't work from home. So there you go. That is the order of the British Prime Minister. The R rate is still amongst the worst in the world. The deaths are continuing at roughly 600 per day on average. We're top of the World Death League. But if you can't work from home, you should go to work. Where, unless you stay alert now, why don't you? Pay attention. Unless you stay alert, unless you control this virus, you'll be right in the thick of a second wave. Just like the people were between 1918 and 1922, when the Spanish flu rampaged throughout the world, killing perhaps 50 million people across the planet. And guess what? Guess what? The second wave of Spanish flu was much, much, much worse than the first. So it's a death sentence that Boris Johnson has just pronounced on thousands of workers and all those who agitated for this, whether they think themselves on the left or believe themselves to be on the right, whether they're libertarians or whether they are utter reactionaries, all of you who have agitated for this will have the blood of thousands of people on your hands. I'll be right back.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Tune in every Thursday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the regular segment called Veterans for Peace, where we focus on the contemporary issues of war and peace that affect veterans, their families, the country, and the world as a whole. Veterans for Peace President Jerry Condon joins the show every Thursday. Hear about this and more every Thursday right here on Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Now, don't forget to stay alert, but hit the phones, Jack and Jacqueline, 02077 982 255 if you are in the UK, and if you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. The poll's up. Now, on my Twitter feed, did the Prime Minister's message make you feel A, safer, B, less safe? And I've got calls on their way through. We will still be doing the Hall of Fame. We'll still be doing the Wall of Shame. I think we'll even still be doing, though I don't yet have it, That Was the Week That Was. And we'll be talking about football, I promise you, in the second hour. Jesse is on the line in Brighton. Let's hear from Jesse. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me on, George. Sorry.
Welcome.
I completely agree that it's totally reckless to advocate for a complete shutdown of the lockdown regime. You know, herd immunity has not worked, and such people would not only be liable for, so much blood on their hands, they would be responsible for the complete breakdown of the NHS. Now, having said all that, I would really struggle to advocate openly for an extension of lockdown. For millions of people in the UK, this is just simply not an option. They constitute the lowest strata of working people in the UK. We have people who are going for whole days without eating, and a minimum, and their own wages and salaries are not enough to make ends meet, let alone a whole 20% being deducted from their wages.
So why don't you put your eloquence and energy into a demand for 100% rather than sending the people struggling to eat into a death trap?
Well, absolutely. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic or anything, but I think the only way out is socialist revolution. So it's only the capitalist system that is bringing people to this impossible contradiction.
Well, we're now in a much sharper contradiction because wrapped up in all that greenery was the bull point. If you can't work from home, you should go to work.
Right, but again, that puts them in danger, doesn't it?
You bet. Jesse, thanks for your call, mate. There's a lot of people trying to get through. Thank you. Alex is in Manchester. Go ahead, Alex.
Hi, George. Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me on. I've got to say I'm a big fan of yours, and I've just joined your Workers' Party, but that's not the reason why I'm...
Thank you. Thank you.
The reason why I phoned in is because I'm in complete agreement with what you've just said. I've been saying for months now, and I've witnessed it. This is not a proper lockdown. I'm a frequent traveller to China, and I've seen what they've done there, and I've friends in Vietnam and other parts of the world. This is not a lockdown. I've got my next-door neighbour who flew in from New York last month it was. He went to his mother's house and his father's house. He drove them to the supermarket. No quarantines, no nothing, just 2 days after. And this is something that's happening across the UK. It's not an isolated incident. I really think we should go much, much harder.
There's 7 flights a day from New York arriving in London.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think there was 100,000 people coming into the UK with no check, no temperature checks, no quarantine, just coming and spreading. And I think that this is actually... The lockdown,
it was always a lie, this lockdown.
I agree.
They've been following the herd immunity from the beginning. Mm-hmm. The only alternative to that, Alex, would be that we really are led by complete blithering Austin Powers idiots that don't know their left hand from their right.
It's top down. It's top down. It's top down. We've got the perfect example of what's going on. I mean, you saw it with Boris shaking hands with people, taking it as the flu, and then Matt Hancock getting the virus. 6 days later, he's back at work.
Yeah, exactly. It's 12 times more fatal than the flu for all those half-wits that were telling us just a couple of weeks ago that it was the equivalent of catching the flu. Alex, thanks for the call. Richard is in Nottingham. Let's hear from Richard. Go ahead.
Oh, hi, George. You're not going to like this, but I think the death. I think the whole thing about COVID-19 is it's being driven by fear and panic. And the reason I say that is when the disease was first came out, there was estimates that it could kill 2 million people in Britain. And that was subsequently revised down.
I never saw that estimate. Whose estimate was that?
I can't remember, but...
that's a pity that you can't remember. The worst figure was 500,000.
Yeah, it was revised.
We're at 55,000 now.
Well, the death rate was revised down to a possible death rate of 500,000.
Yeah.
Then it came down to 30,000, and now it's
nearly double that, and no sign of it dying out, Richard.
Well, if you'd hear me out, it's killed. We're supposed to have passed the peak, and it's killed. Is it 33,000 people?
No. It's according to the Financial Times, whose numbers I trust, and any sensible person would trust. The numbers are 55,000 dead. The World Health Organization has us at the very top of the league of deaths per million. Unless both the FT and the WHO know less than you, Richard.
Well, I'm just going on the government figures. That,
would you? Have you seen our government? Have you seen our government? Do you go by their figures much?
Well, it's the only figures that I've got to go on.
It isn't your only figure that you've got to go. I'm telling you, the World Health Organization figure, do you dispute it? That we have 6 per million and Sweden has 5 per million. First and second in the world in the death rate. Why deny that, Richard?
I'm not denying anything. I'm just putting a point of view.
Go on then.
That actually the death rate, according to the government, is 33,000. And then I'd like to go on to make the point that dying with COVID-19
I've heard all that before.
It's very different from dying of COVID-19.
No, look, I've heard that bilge so many times, I can't bear to hear it again. Richard, if you've got bowel cancer and you're hit by a train, it was the train that killed you, not the bowel cancer.
Well, that's disputable. I mean, if you take
if you're hit by a train, it's disputable that the train killed you.
Well, rather than talk over me, why don't you talk to me?
I'm talking to you.
Listen, George. Just let me put my point of view.
From Ward 5. You just said it's disputable that it was the train that killed you.
Well, let me put my point of view, and then you can talk over me. You know, we had that comedian Eddie Large. Well, he went into hospital with heart failure. He was 78. He'd had a full heart transplant. And because he had COVID-19 recorded in his system at the time of death, they put his death on his death certificate.
This is sophistry, Richard.
I'd
like to ask you a question. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing everything you can to minimize the fatality of a virus which has turned out to be 12 times more fatal than the flu, which has stricken millions of people across the world, which has killed hundreds of thousands of people in the world? What's in it for you to minimize this? Are you an employer? Are you a capitalist? Are you anxious to get back to work? What is it? What's your motive?
Well, I'm all right. If you stop talking at me and rather talk to me, I'll tell you, I've got no interest at all in minimizing anything. I just want to put the whole thing in perspective. I mean, you were talking about the Spanish flu that killed 50 million.
Yeah.
There's no evidence to suggest that we will reach anything like that with COVID-19. It's fear-mongering, and it's scaremongering, and it drives the panic. And I tell you what lies at the end of the panic.
What you don't understand is that 90% of the British people agree with what I'm saying here right now. 10% agree with you. 10% want to end the lockdown. 10% think it's some kind of hoax. 10% think it's fear-mongering, scaremongering. 90% agree with me. Why do you think your arguments have so failed to catch on amongst the British people, Richard?
George, you know, when they invaded Iraq, we were told that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction that were being capable of being used at us. And that drove a panic reaction that had no basis in truth.
And is that what you think? Is that what you think this is? Last point.
Well, do you
think the coronavirus is the equivalent of the fake WMD claims in the Iraq War?
I think it's the same panic that is going to is driving the ship, and that it needs to be put into a proper context.
What is the context?
Well, the context is that it's killing mainly very frail and old people.
Very frail and old people of no importance to you, Richard?
No, they are. But what we need...
You got a mother or father?
What we need
you got any elderly relatives?
Yes, I have.
Well, then why do you use such words? It's
I'll tell you.
It's mainly killing, you say, airily, old and frail people. Are old and frail people not as entitled to life as you and I?
Exactly. Well, why wouldn't you just completely safeguard the elderly?
But how do you completely safeguard it if everyone else is passing the virus onto each other? How do you do that? And you may be aware, perhaps you have overlooked it, that a 6-week-old baby died of the coronavirus just yesterday. You think that's funny, Richard? Why did you laugh?
No, I don't think I laugh. I sighed because you don't know what that baby died of. It might have died with COVID-19 in its system, but it didn't mean to say that it's necessarily... Peter Hitchens...
Listen, Doctor. Listen, Dr. Richard. I know that the doctors said the 6-week-old baby had died of the coronavirus. Now, who am I going to believe? Richard in Ward 5 in Nottingham, or am I going to believe the doctors that treated the baby? And it wasn't a sigh, it was a laugh. It was a laugh because you think that any evidence from medical professionals is somehow the equivalent of Alistair Campbell and Tony Blair lying about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Be gone with you. Annie in Bishop Auckland, who is a care home worker. Go ahead, Annie.
Hi, George. Yeah, I'm sorry I missed the beginning of your show because I was listening to Boris's...
I understand that, yeah.
Thing. I did, however, listen to Richard just before me. Mm-hmm. But to brush him aside, if you don't mind. Yeah. I want to say that after Boris's speech, I'm heartbroken, I'm disappointed, but most of all, I'm incensed. I'm a care worker. I work in a care home. We've had positive test results. I go in every day and do 12-hour shifts, as do my colleagues, as do a lot of working-class people up and down this country. And because the majority of this country are working-class people and don't have the option to work from home, we've been doing this for weeks. I am disgusted that there was no policing on this lockdown because everywhere I've been, when I've been going to work, I've seen people out on the streets, I've seen people in back gardens with other people not from their families. And now he's relaxing it, the non-existent lockdown even more. Where I work and where I live, we're in a crisis. And I just wanted to tell you I am completely disgusted with the way this government has handled this pandemic.
Well, I'm extremely grateful that you called. I doubt there will be a better call this evening. You're a care home worker where thousands of our, as Richard put it rather airily, frail and elderly people have perished, along with many of the carers looking after them. 200 NHS workers have died at their post. And still we've got people calling it some kind of hoax, like the Iraq War WMD hoax. And the more I look at what Boris Johnson's just said, Annie, none of it matters except one sentence. That you should work from home if you can, but if you cannot, you should go to work.
Yeah, this is devastating.
That's the only sentence that matters in what he said, because that means that the employer will be expecting you back to work.
Yep.
And if
and
you
it's
don't
the working
go,
class again that will suffer.
Now, you were already at work unprotected because you had to be at work. The nurses had to be at work. The doctors had to be at work. Now everybody's got to go back to work. If you're working in B&Q, you're working in Topshop, or you're working in a factory or a warehouse, now, according to Boris Johnson, you've got to be alert. As long as you're alert to control the virus, you should go back to work. That is the long and the short of it. It's a death sentence, Annie, on thousands of working class people.
Yeah. It breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. I don't know whether to cry or stand and punch. I can't write placards and I can't go on a street. I don't know what to do.
You've nearly made me cry, I'll tell you that. Annie, thank you for that call in Bishop Auckland. Let's hear from Jim in Renfrew. Go ahead, Jim.
Hi, George.
Hi.
I totally agree with what you pinpointed there. This is a green light for employers to put pressure on people to go back to work.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to ask you, I was reading a study about the epidemiologists in Sweden who, as you know, are pursuing a policy of herd immunity.
Although they did ban flights in.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Unlike us.
They did indeed, yeah. My question was, the other part that astonished me about Boris's statement was after he said you should go back to work if you can, he then said don't use public transport, right? And in
Get
this
on your
study,
bike. Remember Norman Tibbet,
right.
Jim?
Exactly, or walk 20 miles, you know. But these epidemiologists in Sweden, I'll finish my point.
Yeah.
There is some suspicion. They're actually discouraging the use of masks, and there's some suspicion that it's because, of course, they want the virus to spread.
Yeah.
If you want herd immunity, you want the virus to spread. Why do you think the government, if they're telling people to go not use public transport, why will they not encourage mandatory masks?
Well, these are some of the multiple contradictions. I'd go this far, Jim.
Yeah.
I don't think that Boris Johnson has got one single thing right in this entire crisis. And it's not often that you can say that, even about a Tory government. Everything they have done has turned to ashes, and literally ashes and death. They have not made a single call which is the right call. And in Sweden, of course, the wet dream of the Peter Hitchens is Sweden is right on our shoulder as the worst death rate in the entire world. Jim, thanks for the call. Kath is in Devizes. Let's hear from Kath. Go ahead, Kath.
Yes, hi. It's about the same thing, really. The government's saying you should. It's that word should, isn't it?
Yeah.
You should go to work if you can't work from home.
Yeah.
Well, it's such an obvious nonsense statement, really.
But don't use public transport.
Well, yeah, quite. But
you should go to work
it's so stupid
on your bike.
Most people's jobs are just not there anyway, are they? The shops are not open and lots of things are not going to come online to be open for absolutely ages. So what is the point of saying you should go to work? But the real problem is it's covering the government's arse, really. It's covering them to stop the furlough payments because they're saying, well, we told you to go to work, you know, if you're not going to work, why should we pay you? It is really just giving people an excuse to berate the people who can't get to work or whose work isn't there anyway, you know? It just gives a bad feeling about these poor people who are stuck at home, who would want to be working, really, of course they would.
Marvellous call, Kath. Thank you so much for it. I really appreciate it. Wayne is in Cheshire. Let's hear from him. Wayne, go ahead.
I wanted to talk about the situation with the flights. Now, I feel that during this horrible situation, that the Conservative government still want to basically adhere to the class system. And I've been to, over the last number of years, I've been to a lot of AGMs. I need to explain this so you know what's going on. Now, a lot of people, actually, I didn't realise this, fly in, they're English people, but they live abroad, they live big houses and all the rest of it. And I think the government don't want to give these affluent people a lot of hassle coming in, going out of the country. So basically, it's like the class system, they just want to leave them alone, and that's why they won't be answering any of these questions for these flights.
It is one of the most discombobulating features of the so-called lockdown, that hundreds of thousands of people from abroad, including the worst affected places in the world, have been allowed and are continuing after tonight to be allowed to fly in here without even a temperature check at the frontier, never mind being put into quarantine, which is what is happening virtually everywhere else. Certainly everywhere else that they have managed this. I'll remind you that the death rates in China, in South Korea, especially in Vietnam, where the death rate is zero, with a border with China, the track and trace, test, contact trace, embargo on all entry into the country has kept their death rates at the bottom of the league, whilst ours has reached the very top. Wayne, thanks for the call. David is in Bedford. Go ahead, David.
Hello, good evening, George.
Good evening.
I'm actually an expat. I live in Bulgaria, but my wife's in the UK as a care worker, and I have just returned to give her emotional support because she's so stressed.
Okay.
I was appalled that I could just walk through the airport without any checks at all. And when I saw that the country's in an economic lockdown, but doing nothing for the virus compared with other countries. I'll give you an example.
Isn't it?
Yeah, when I left in April, on the 17th of April, and arrived in Bulgaria, I had my temperature taken. I had to fill a form in with my phone number and saying where I would go and self-isolate. Every single day during the 14 days lockdown in my house, the health service rang me to ask me what my temperature was. The local mayor was the only person that came to the house and did my shopping for me twice during the 14 days. And
this was in Bulgaria?
Yes, and people there without a mask on are getting fined equivalent to about 6 months of an average salary.
That is an amazing call, David. I'm really grateful to you for it. Let's take Chris in East Kilbride. Chris, go ahead.
Hi, George. How are you?
Yeah, good. Nice to hear you. Go on.
Right. George, I'd just like to point out a little thing that's actually happened to my family. My sister actually caught COVID-19 from, she's actually works in a private care home. Now, what actually happened is she ended up in hospital. She was very sick, thankfully. Thankfully, she's recovered, and she's now on a 3-week line. The private care home has now told her she's getting statutory sick pay. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll tell you what I've started a campaign for today, Chris, and you should pass this on to your sister. We need to nationalise the entire care home granny farm industry. We need to bring it into public ownership. We need to end the idea of private profit from, I was going to say looking after our old people and our vulnerable, but in many care homes, that's actually just about the last thing that happens in there. These care homes are all now in danger, apparently, of financial collapse. And as they collapse, the government should take them in. We need to look completely, comprehensively, differently at the way we treat our elderly people. I have advocated all of my life for a reform to the taxation system, which would allow people to expand their homes, build granny flats, convert lofts and so on to make space so that people could keep their elderly people at home, as any civilized society should do. And where that's not possible for any variety of reasons, the condition of the elderly person, or they may not have family and so on, then there will have to be care homes, and these care homes have to be part of the NHS and social care system. So the care home in question, I don't know if you're prepared to name it, has an absolute obligation to its workforce, never mind a legal obligation to its clients. And if it's not living up to its legal obligation to your sister, then action needs to be taken. Can you say which care home it is, or is that difficult?
I think that would be difficult because I'm not in the position to do that.
All right.
However, I think it is a disgrace. I think it's something you champion so far, and I'm really pleased that you're doing that. And thanks very much for your support.
Thank you. God bless you, and give your sister my regards. Please, I appreciate it, Chris. Poll number 1, did the Prime Minister's message make you feel A, safer, 21%, B, less safe, 79%? You can vote now on my Twitter feed. Please do so. Now, I did a short for RT earlier in the week. Here it is. Take a look. The first casualty of war, of course, is truth, and the coronavirus has turned into a war. A war against Chinese people. There's been a tripling of attacks on Chinese people in Britain in just 3 months. Or even people who look like they might be Chinese, like my own pregnant wife who's had it in the neck. Your ethnicity is to blame for all of this, someone told her in a pleasant middle-class suburb. War against Chinese people in the United States, with a gigantic spike of hateful attacks on a people that a little more than 100 years ago were subjected to mass lynching in San Francisco, in a place where, during the Second World War, millions of people who looked like my wife were interned just because of what they looked like and where their ancestors came from. But much more seriously, war against China is definitely coming down the pipeline. The United States has sent its warships into the South China Sea, the clue being in the name. Doing so, they say, in the name of insisting on the international sovereignty over waters which are clearly and have been for centuries recognized as China's waters. War against China on the economic level. Donald Trump promising to exact a gigantic price from China for the coronavirus. His handling of the coronavirus having turned the American death toll into far and away the most devastating in the world. There's threats that the United States may renege on its debts to China, may confiscate Chinese assets in the United States, a ramping up of weapons sales and diplomatic and political support for Taiwan, half a century after Richard Nixon agreed there was only one China. All over America's pattern of allied countries in the European Union, but particularly here in Britain, a thoroughgoing deep dive investigation is to take place into Britain's relations with China. Having alienated all the countries of the European Union, it seems we are bent upon alienating just about everyone else. This is extremely dangerous talk. First of all, the coronavirus, according to the American Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, did not come from a laboratory, did not come from the laboratory in Wuhan. Wuhan, by the way, has not had a single coronavirus case in the last 29 days. And Cambridge University located cases of coronavirus hundreds of miles to the south of Wuhan, far away from any laboratory, as being the likely source of the Chinese outbreak of the virus. But it's increasingly clear to me that the virus didn't come from China at all, never mind from a faulty laboratory in Wuhan, which, by the way, is funded by the United States government to the tune of millions of dollars a year. Now we know that in France, in December, there were cases of the coronavirus 19. Now we know that there are dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of different kinds of coronavirus, some of them even more deadly than the one which was identified first in China and mapped, its RNA, its DNA, carefully charted rapidly by Chinese scientists and then sent out as a warning all around the world. The types that are affecting Europe are quite different and more deadly than the type that affected China. The type that affected the east coast of the United States, far more deadly than the type, quite different, which affected the west coast of the United States. So, if, as seems overwhelmingly likely, and in the view of the US Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, the case that the coronavirus is a naturally occurring phenomenon, it's clear that it was naturally occurring all over the world. So to blame China is not just fatuous, but it's extremely dangerous because it's a look over there maneuver to obfuscate the fact that the United States and Great Britain are far and away the most fatally affected places on the earth. Now, you might think that's just an unlucky coincidence. Nothing to do with our two blonde bombshell political leaders. And if you do, I've got a bridge here in London that I can sell you at a knockdown price. They say there must be an independent investigation into China's handling of the coronavirus. I'm all for that, though I'm not sure how independent it can be when the United States government, Pompeo and Trump have already found China guilty of being the cause of this whole thing. But I'm in favor of that. But I also want an investigation into how the British government handled this so catastrophically badly. And I'm sure the people in the United States also want the same. This is an election year in America, so a bit of wagging the dog was always likely to be the course of events. The Democrats hate Russia, the Republicans hate China. Neither can deal with the fact that they are two cheeks of the same backside, offering the same hot air to the people in the place of things which will defend America and make it truly great again. Well, the first casualty of war is truth. There's a whole lot of lies in the air, along with all those coronavirus.
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view.
Now here's a note from my editor. Boris will face questions in the House of Commons tomorrow. He hasn't clearly spelled out a way forward. Some primary schools in England going back on June the 1st, some leisure facilities from July. But his much-trailed quarantining of arriving airline passengers has been fudged. What happened to the garden centres, which government sources leaked would reopen on Wednesday? There has clearly been a huge drawing back from the week of leaks by government. Why is the question? Tory complaints or public response? And being a Scotsman, he adds, What a burach. In burach, indeed, it is. Woody says, Richard from Nottingham appears to be the intellectual equivalent of Boris Johnson. Shall we give him an important job? And Chris says, NHS workers are not care home and social care workers. Most care homes are privately run, low pay, encouragement to work while sick. My father luckily lives in a county council run home. They locked down 3 weeks before the country did, and they had PPE in place. My point entirely, Chris. That's what every home needs to be. And Terry says that statement from Johnson was so ambiguous that my wife and I can't agree on what he actually meant. All I realise is that the longer these crackpots run the country, the more people will die. Let's get the news, including this up-to-date news from the inimitable Jamie Lowe.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Profits, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
It's time to double down with Max and Stacy.
Yeah, double down. We're talking markets, finance, business, economics, ka-ching, bling, just about everything money related on Sputnik. It's called Double Down.
We're asking, are dead cats bouncing or have fundamentals changed? That's this week on Double Down.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has told the nation that lockdown will continue, stating that the 5 tests for ending the current lockdown have not yet been met, but some measures are to be relaxed. People who aren't able to work from home, for example in construction and manufacturing, are now being encouraged to go to work, and schools and non-essential shops could be open from as early as June the 1st. From Wednesday, people will be able to undertake an unlimited amount of exercise, but the Prime Minister warned of increased fines if social distancing is not followed. He also stated that it would soon be time to impose quarantine on people travelling to the country by air, but how soon was unclear. In his address to the nation, Boris Johnson has, however, unveiled a 5-tier COVID alert system to rank the threat from coronavirus. The system is designed to mirror the independent terror alert system, which ranks the threat to the public from low to critical and helps decide what protective measures are required. The system will be run by a new joint biosecurity centre who will decide the level of threat from 1 to 5 based on the rate of infection and the number of new cases of COVID-19. Britain's Community Secretary Robert Jenrick is defending the government's update of the coronavirus message, which is being criticised for being vague. It's changed from stay at home to stay alert, control the virus, save lives. However, the stay-at-home advice remains for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said in a press conference earlier that she didn't know what stay alert means. She added that for Scotland, given the fragility of progress made so far, it would be catastrophic to drop the stay-at-home message. She's criticised the UK government's message as vague and imprecise. Meanwhile, former US President Barack Obama is strongly criticising his successor Donald Trump over his response to the coronavirus crisis. In a private conference call, he called the US handling of the pandemic an absolute chaotic disaster. His remarks were made while encouraging former staff to work for Joe Biden's presidential election team. During the call, Obama said Trump's approach to government was partly to blame for the US response to coronavirus. The White House says in response that President Trump's unprecedented action has saved American lives. More than 77,000 people have now died, and the US has 1.2 million confirmed coronavirus cases, both by far the highest in the world. staying stateside now, and President Trump has hailed the first major professional sports event in America after 2 months, a mixed martial arts contest, as an important step as US states start to ease the lockdown restrictions. It began with a pre-recorded message from Trump standing outside the White House. The fights took place without fans in Jacksonville, Florida on Saturday night and were broadcast on ESPN. Tesla boss Elon Musk has threatened to pull the firm's headquarters and only US car factory out of California after local officials stopped the company from reopening the electric vehicle plant. He tweeted saying it's the final straw and that Tesla will now move its HQ and future programs to Nevada immediately. Tesla also filed a lawsuit against Alameda County, accusing the county health department of overstepping federal and state pandemic restrictions when it blocked the car maker from restarting productions at its factory in Fremont. And finally, a French surfer has survived after being bitten by a shark in Australia by punching it twice when it attacked him at Bells Beach in Victoria. 23-year-old Dylan Nakas escaped with minor injuries to his legs and required stitches for a few puncture wounds. A second surfer nearby said he started screaming and thought he was messing around in the water. He then realised that the Frenchman wasn't joking and rushed in to help. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
You are indeed watching the mother of all talk shows, the Open University of the Airwaves, where you are encouraged to speak back to the professor. I need your calls, 02077 982 255 if you're in the UK. If you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. Did the Prime Minister's message make you feel A, safer, or B, less safe? You can vote now on my Twitter feed. And lots of social media coming in on all platforms. Our Twitter user says, Boris is an idiot. The government doesn't know what it's at. They just can't be trusted. Death on their hands. And Kovichny says, worried for the English, grateful they are on their own island, separated from the rest of Europe. But hey, at least they got Brexit done. Sort of, almost. And Max says, my partner works in cosmetic surgery. Her employers are forcing them back next Tuesday under the guise they are wearing a face mask, so don't have to abide by the 2-meter rule. Georgie says, brilliant address to the Moats Nation just now. Thank you, George. No one should be forced into a danger zone to work. As you stress, it is legally wrong as well as morally wrong. Thank you, Georgie. Dave says, is it me, or are the only things that are going to be allowable from Wednesday are those things that the government has already lost control of, thus turning an inglorious defeat into something we should all feel grateful for? And on Facebook, Andy says, I'm disputing I've been hit by a train. And on YouTube, Alfred says, you can't stop the virus, you can only delay it. Protect the vulnerable and their carers. Let our immune system do what it's been doing for 100,000 years and get on with our lives. Or deaths, Alfred, you might have added. And one email, Paul says, it now seems that the narrative is changing on the furlough scheme. The people who've stayed home will now be portrayed as the new idle through choice, villains. No furlough means the pittance and sanctioning of universal credit. I guess that's the plan. Well said, Paul. Now, Lisa Nand is not just a travel writer, she's the queen of travel writers. Her podcasts on travel are an absolute must. Even I have done one with her. And she joins me now, I'm glad to say, to look at what this all means, Lisa, tourism's dead, isn't it? Foreign tourism. It will never come back.
I want to say no. I'm desperate to, even though I'm a travel professional, I'm Googling coronavirus travel every day and looking what the Foreign Office is saying and that sort of thing. I want to say no, it's not dead. Who would have thought that would have people like British Airways in trouble, Virgin Atlantic in trouble? But, with the quarantine, Boris Johnson referred to the quarantine. He didn't say exactly what it was going to be. He said something along the lines of there will be a quarantine. But the travel industry are terrified. They think it's been bashed enough and this will be the last sort of bashing, and essentially might kill it off, hopefully not for good, but definitely for a long period into the future.
You better get doing some podcasts in Britain's coastal resorts and the Highland wildernesses, because that's where any sensible person is going to go for their holidays from now on, no?
Well, you say that. However, inbound tourism and domestic tourism is worth a lot of money. It's worth £127 billion to us a year. Who's going to come into the country? There's not enough people here to go on holiday and sustain all the businesses that travel involved. It's not just about the airline. It's about the tiny B&Bs, the hotels, the Airbnbs, the cleaners, the musicians, the waiters, the restaurants, all of that. When you think about all the industry that the travel industry entails, this is a massive loss to the country. It's not, some people will be saying, and rightly so, that health is more important and why are you moaning about your holiday? It's not about, well, it is a little bit about that as well. Other people will be desperate to go abroad, but it's about the economic impact. It's absolutely disastrous.
Now, why should we save Richard Branson's Virgin Airways?
Because I think this as well. Richard Branson, he's got a few quid. Could he bail out the whole airline? No, probably he can't. I haven't seen his personal finances. I know he's rich, but I don't think he could bail out the whole airline. It is about all the business that's involved. Like I said, all the other business that's trickling in and out. And we are a world-class place for travel. We've got an industry that we need to be really, really proud of. Virgin, BA, they've all been brilliant on the world stage. People are coming into Heathrow now. I know a lot of people are moaning about that. There's about 10,000 people coming into the country every day, but they are going to be in quarantine, So I think we should.
Well,
I think we need to save
that was one of many ambiguities in the announcement by the Prime Minister this evening. They are going to be in quarantine, but not yet.
No, apparently, well, the Prime Minister didn't really say, did he? But apparently he's going to tell us more about it tomorrow. And the quarantine is widely thought to begin at the end of May, which is too little too late. It really is. Even the World Health Organization say if you're going to quarantine, do it at the beginning. Do it in March when we shut down. Why do it now when people are going to come in? People are trickling in and nobody's going on holiday. They're coming here for all sorts of important reasons, and they're going to be subject to the same lockdown and social distancing laws as we are. Why do it now? It's just too little too late, or maybe even too much too late.
But if you were a sensible investor, you'd be investing in Zoom, wouldn't you, rather than in Virgin Airways? We've learned that it isn't necessary to be somewhere to work, for example. I'm working on Zoom practically every day.
You don't necessarily need to be somewhere, no. And business travel, I think, will probably change forever, just as business itself, people working from home, is going to change forever. And maybe that was needed. We've got to think of the environment as well. And travel does have a heavy burden on that. But I always say that travel is about so much more than just taking your holiday. And taking your holiday is really actually very important. But you've got people stuck all over the world now, people that were going to see their families, people that are separated from loved ones, people that had weddings planned, that might be seeing people that they care about for the last time. Travel is about so much more than going on your holiday. So, there are things about the industry that needed to change, but not the whole decimation of the industry. It's terrifying. The virus is terrifying. I'm not taking away from that, but this is terrifying for the industry.
Now, business travel will ineluctably have to change and will probably die. But so will squeezing a couple of hundred people onto a cheap budget airline where the person next to you's tie is in your soup. The sardine travel, the sardine days of mass travel, they'll surely die now also. Unfortunately, we lost Lisa there. Lisa, thank you very much indeed. It was short, but it was very sweet. Thank you. Pat says something no one seems to be talking about. All the meat packers in America, thousands of them are getting sick. from COVID-19, and now in Germany too. Is it possible that cows, pigs and chickens are infecting those workers? If our house pets can get this virus, well, it's only logical. Factory farms are, as we now know, a perfect breeding ground for disease. And Jake says, I used to like George, as he used to be right about many things. All he does is shout rubbish now. He is wrong about the virus. All the media is fake. The real people are saying how it is on social media. This includes medical professionals. The virus is real, but the death count isn't. That's from Jake in Ward 5 at Broadmoor. And Greenie on Twitter says, I think it's right to scrap the stay-at-home, protect the NHS banner. It's probably already led to the deaths of thousands of people who've stayed away from the NHS due to COVID-19, missing crucial appointments for numerous tests and treatment, which will have sealed their fate. Or they could have gone to the hospital and got the COVID-19, in which case, Greenie, you would have insisted that's not what they died from. And Rizwan says, blood is on Boris Johnson's hands. And Alan says, I work in manufacturing and I'm furloughed. If there's no demand for the thing we manufacture because the industry we supply is closed, what should my employer do? Recall me to work and pay me for doing nothing? Can they continue to furlough me if the government says I should work? Quite right, Alan, that's exactly. Here's Ian in Hounslow, right next to Heathrow Airport. Ian, welcome.
Hello, George.
Hi.
Yes, I was just thinking about all the people who are suffering financially during the COVID-19, yet the corporatists are looking for bailouts. EasyJet have got a £600 million loan from the government.
Yeah, but not before they paid out £100 million in dividends and bonuses to their shareholders and the people who run the company.
Precisely. Richard Branson, I think, he's been asked 3 times to fill his begging bowl with our money. And also, all these travel insurers, the airlines, the credit card companies are welching on what they owe customers and clients. And they're offering them credit vouchers. They need that money. If they're having hard times because of the lockdown, they need that money, and they need that money now.
Absolutely correct. The offering of vouchers for future travel instead of refunds, which they're legally obliged to do, is a national scandal, and it needs to be called out. But nobody's calling it out. Neither the so-called leader of the opposition, what's his name again, or the Prime Minister, or the mainstream media. None of them are calling out. This is theft.
Now, I've written to my MP, I've written to the Prime Minister, I've written to the Chancellor, I've written to the umbrella organisations for the insurers and the banks, and I've written to the mainstream media, and I've appealed to all comrades through the Morning Star to write and put pressure on these carpetbaggers and give those people their money.
Thank you, Ian. Good call. Here's Luke in West Wales. Go ahead, Luke.
Hello, George. Yeah, I'm calling really partly about a friend of mine who's a fellow caretaker, and he's been told he's got to go back to work now. Well, he's been in work, but he's been doing a half week, and there's 2 of them, and they've been sharing that, so they don't have to work together. And now they're being told that they've got to go back to work in Tequila again, and he's, of course, not very happy about it. He's got an elderly father, and he's actually put a spanner in the works. He's managed to ask him for risk assessments and method statements and all the rest of it. So I imagine that's causing a bit of a problem now.
What's the? Is he in the union, Luke? What's the union saying about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're both civil servants, if you like, council workers. I mean, we're manual workers, we're caretakers, but yeah, so there is a union available. I don't know whether he's a member of it.
The union, everyone should be in the union, and the union should be saying, if you're calling our members back to work, where's your guarantee that they will be safe in doing so? Which is a legal, obligation. I quoted it. Article 44 of the Employment Standards Act makes it an obligation on the employer to provide a safe workplace and absolute legal protection for someone who refuses to work in an unsafe workplace.
I caught what you were saying about that, yeah, and I totally agree. I mean, it's a bad situation where people are being forced back into work now.
Yeah, that's right.
There's one other point I'd like to make quickly, before I get cut off.
Sure.
It seems to me that these three nations that are leading leading the charge in the death tolls, they're all the nations that have been persecuting Julian Assange.
Yes, that's one of many. That's one of many coincidences. Yes.
Yeah, isn't it just? And I feel that we've got a serious problem in the world. Obviously, I mean it's very obvious to most of us. And I can hear the war drums beating, not just for China, but for revolution. I just feel that it's high time we did something about this.
Well, I'm not sure about revolution, but I am sure that people are becoming extremely angry, and I don't think they'll be less angry after the Prime Minister's statement tonight.
Sure, revolution would change the situation, George, personally, but I totally understand where you're coming from in that revolution's a scary prospect. And especially
not scary to me, but I fear scary to too many others for the time being. Luke, thanks for that call. Let me take a quick break, and then it's the inimitable Garland Nixon, birthday boy just a few days ago, on what COVID-19 is doing to Donald Trump's chances of re-election. Stay tuned.
Radio Sputnik.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Prophets, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Radio Sputnik, we speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
So, did the Prime Minister's message make you feel A, safer, B, less safe? 20% of you feel safer after Boris Johnson's honeyed words this evening, but 80% of you feel less safe. And you can vote on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Now, of course, it's not just in Britain, though Britain is now, according to the WHO, the death capital of the world in numbers per millions who have perished. Sweden is second. The United States is third. And in terms of actual numbers, of course, the United States has far and away the largest number of cases and the largest number of fatalities. And it's the bad luck of the incumbent president that it's all happening not just on his watch, but in the few months before the next presidential election. Garland Nixon is my colleague, working at Sputnik, working in America as a radio talk show host. He's a political analyst of note, and he's a good friend of mine too. Garland, welcome back on board the Sputnik. Let me ask you first off, on the face of it, the mess that is the United States, its economy, its healthcare system, its inability to handle this tsunami of death and suffering from the virus, that must spell death for Donald Trump now, don't you think?
One would think that. I mean, certainly looking at the environment that we're in right now, you would think that Donald Trump's chances would be very poor of winning. However, the thing that's working out on his side is that the party, the so-called opposition party, the Democratic Party, has pretty much collapsed around a really pathetic candidate. They put forth Joe Biden, a man with a history of corruption. Actually, Joe Biden is one of the few candidates that you could find that would probably exceed Donald Trump in most of the areas where the Democratic Party has attacked him. So from the looks of things, it appears that the Democratic Party has collapsed so bad that it's Donald Trump's to lose, because the Democratic Party, they don't have a candidate that can beat him. They basically have no, they don't have any moral standing in that their nominee, their presumptive nominee, Joe Biden, has a credible accusation of sexual assault, and the Democratic Party is doing a 180 on all of their arguments about, protecting women and sexual assault. So the party is an absolute disaster right now, and that could spell victory for Donald Trump.
Well, to paraphrase the last surviving mass killer, certainly the greatest mass killer on the planet, Henry Kissinger, it's a pity they both can't lose. But unfortunately, now that Jesse Ventura has pulled out of the presidential race, one of them is going to win.
Yes, and right now, and I would argue maybe not, because I think the Democratic Party has put themselves in a bad position for this reason. Their focus was not beating Donald Trump. Their focus was beating Bernie Sanders. Donald Trump is not an existential threat to the Democratic Party as it stands. The Democratic Party is an elite club, and the people in that club do quite well financially. They maintain power and finances. If Bernie Sanders had won, he was, pretty obviously going to throw a monkey wrench in the way that party worked, and it could harm their ability to make money off the system. Donald Trump, if they lose to Donald Trump, it doesn't matter. Their fundraising is great, and everything will continue in the same way that it has. So in an odd way, the Democratic Party, from their perspective, has already won by holding off a challenger to the left that would have held them to account. So now they don't have to be worried about being held to account. They simply say, well, Donald Trump's a bad guy, and if we lose, who cares? We can do 4 more years of this.
Yes, I see that. I see from his basement, though I'm not sure he knows he's there, Joe Biden occasionally stumbling over an auto cue. But they've clearly adopted the policy of giving Donald Trump enough rope to hang himself. And the more I see of the press briefings of Donald Trump, the more I'm surprised that men in white coats aren't coming on to take him away. His statements, for example, this week about one of Vice President Pence's staff having tested positive, if that wasn't a parody, it was a performance by a man who quite clearly is unhinged.
Yes, and if you look at, let's start here. If you look at the United States right now, this country politically, it's a sad state of affairs. When you look at our nominees, when we put forth a guy who's basically a clown in Donald Trump, and another nominee who's barely cognizantly aware of his surroundings, as you said, what does that tell you about this country right now politically? And look at our foreign policy team, Mike Pompeo, a raving lunatic. So, these guys are reflective of what the United States political system has become, an absolute disaster. And might I add, and this is something that I think has to be taken into account, and that is the desperation in America right now. What's not being reported around the world, and certainly not in on American television very much, is the hunger. We have food lines literally miles long. We have America, a country that argues that it's the wealthiest country in the history of the world, I'm not going to call it poverty, absolute hunger, somewhere between 1 and 4 all families in the United States are reporting that their children are not going to bed well fed with enough food. So that's an issue. We're a country that politically has collapsed. Obviously, economically, we've collapsed, and our government does not have the moral wherewithal to simply do the things they need to do to make sure that people have the most basic of their needs met. So the United States is in a really bad condition right now.
How did it come to that, Garland? Your country is a great country. It's the wealthiest and most powerful country in the world that there has ever been. From sea to shining sea, it has everything that God could possibly have given it. How does it come to the pass where the pick is between Joe Biden and Donald Trump?
Well, we call ourselves a great country, but one of the great football, our kind of American football coaches, they called him the tuna, Bill Parcells, had a team full of stars one time, and his team was losing. And they said, well, you have a great team. And he said, wait a minute, we're not great. You are what your record says you are. That's America. We are what our record says we are. We are a country that's extremely violent. We are what we claimed North Korea was now, in that we are we're a country that all of our money goes to the military. We have a powerful military that's going around. Think about this. We have $13 billion aircrafts floating around the seas, shooting $1 and $10 million missiles, and literal food lines. So are we great? Is a country great that has that kind of money, that spends that kind of money, and their citizens are literally standing in line begging for food? I never thought I'd see my country come to this level. But no, we are not a great country anymore. We're simply what we claim North Korea was. That's what we've become, a military empire who allows their citizens to literally starve in the streets.
The percentage of unemployment now in the US is higher than it was in the Great Depression in the 1930s. It's more than 25%. Is there any sign from the left or right, of an incipient uprising or rebellion about all this?
I haven't even seen sign of a left or right. I've seen sign of an oligarchical leadership. Right now, Donald Trump has put together a team of people to determine when the country's going to reopen. He has Tim Cook on there, Sheldon Adelson, Robert Kraft. So he has a team of billionaires to decide the direction of the country. So we already know who they're going to look out for. And I honestly believe this. One of the reasons that the United States has not taken the necessary action to ensure that people have their needs met, giving them some money, something for food, is to create an air of desperation. If the government says, well, we want to open up immediately, and it goes bad and a lot of people perish, well, they'll be blamed. But if they create an air of desperation, then people are begging to go back to work so they won't starve to death. And if it goes bad, which it quite likely might, then they can simply say, well, you guys asked for it. So I think that's part of the problem. The billionaires are in charge everywhere, and they're going to look out for the billionaires.
Now, of course, because the schools are closed, there's fewer mass school shootings, but the racism hasn't gone away. I saw some shocking footage this week, I think it was in Boston, of the police savagely attacking black people in the streets on the guise, at least, of social distancing offenses. In this pressure cooker that you described so eloquently, the racial tensions in the United States are potentially going to erupt if it's a long, hot summer.
Well, I expect those types of things to erupt. When you have this kind of economic pain, when you have people who can't even meet their most basic needs, you're going to have social unrest. We have a country that told people you have to be locked up for the next eight weeks, and it certainly appears that may have been, what needed to be done. But they've done nothing to mitigate the poverty. They've just simply said you have to be in your home and you have to have enough money money or whatever to handle it, which most Americans don't, and they're doing nothing to mitigate it. And so things are going to heat up. Certainly there's some racial divisions in America that have existed for centuries. But with this type of frustration, fear, and stress, I expect that we'll see a lot more social unrest. And, maybe once there's social unrest and things start to fall apart and their cash cow starts to melt down, maybe then and only then the billionaires will think to save their own hides and to save the economy that's making them rich. Maybe they'll do something then, but certainly not before.
Garland Nixon, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Pleasure always talking to you. Now, this is where we mine history for the events that occurred in this week in the past. 7 days that changed the world. On this day in 1994, Nelson Mandela became South Africa's first black president after more than 3 centuries of white rule and apartheid. And Mandela's African National Congress, the ANC, won 252 of the 400 seats in the first elections in South Africa's history. The inauguration ceremony was attended by politicians and dignitaries from more than 140 countries around the world. Many of them, of course, who had been pillars of support for apartheid hitherto. Still today, on this day, in 1940, German forces invaded Holland, Belgium and Luxembourg by air and land. Didn't take long for the tent to fold. The invasion began at dawn with large numbers of aeroplanes attacking the main aerodromes and landing troops. In London, it was announced that Winston Churchill would lead a coalition government after Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, about whom more later, stepped down when Labour's Clement Attlee refused to support him in a coalition. There was to be blood, sweat and tears, as Churchill predicted, but there would also be victory. And also on this day in 1967, 2 Rolling Stones appeared on drugs charges. Just 2, I hear you say. Also on this day, magistrates in Sussex heard that after a tip-off, police raided Keith Richards' mansion. He and Mick Jagger were charged. Although drugs were found, there was no sign of the fabled Mars bar. I've no idea what that means. The 2 men were convicted, but their sentences were later purged. A day later, in May 1985, and this one is close to my heart, 56 people died after fire engulfed the Bradford City football stadium. More than 200 were injured. Most of the dead were children or elderly people, crushed in the rush to escape the inferno. It's close to me because I served as the MP for the constituency in Bradford, where the ground is situated. And on the 12th of May, 1994, the Labour leader, John Smith, died after 2 serious heart attacks at the age of 55, and history changed. I was never close to him politically, but he was a close personal friend of mine and a genuinely fine and great man. Shortly after his death, Tony Blair became the leader and then Prime Minister, and we know what happened next. On May the 13th, 1981, the Pope, John Paul II, was shot 4 times as he blessed the crowds in St. Peter's Square in Rome. Surgeons successfully performed a 5-hour operation. The Pope later publicly forgave his attempted assassin, Mehmet Ali Hajka Ajka, and even visited him in prison. In June 2000, with the agreement of the Pope himself, Ajka was pardoned by the Italian president after serving 19 years. And in this week, in May, in 1957, Britain exploded its first hydrogen bomb as part of a series of tests on Christmas Island in the Pacific. In 1940, on the same day, the 15th, Richard and Maurice McDonald surely pioneered fast food when they opened the first McDonald's restaurant in San Bernardino, California. Wow, 1940. On May the 16th in 1943, the Nazis brutally crushed the resistance in the Jewish ghetto in Warsaw and ended 28 days of fighting. About 50 of the 1,000 fighters escaped the ghetto through the sewers, and some fought in the Second Warsaw Uprising by the Polish Home Army in August 1945. When Soviet troops liberated Warsaw on the 17th of January 1945, only about 200 Jews remained alive, and the old city had been virtually destroyed. And finally, on May the 17th, 1943, an audacious RAF bombing raid in the industrial heartland of Germany wrecked 3 dams serving the Ruhr Valley. The mission became popularly known as the Dam Busters Raid and was immortalized in the 1954 war film. It was one of the most famous air operations of World War II. That was the week. That was from the pages of history. Let's go back to the switchboard, where Chris in Bo'ness is up next. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, George.
Hi.
Hi, good to speak to you.
And you, mate.
I've just got a very short point to make. I'm a good supporter of you, and I like everything you're saying, more or less. But I must pull you on one stat you just brought out at the very, very beginning of the show, where you mentioned that the UK was ahead of the death per million due to this dreadful disease, and Sweden were close behind in second place.
Yeah.
And I'm currently looking at the stats from today, Statista, who I follow closely, and according to the stats from today, May the 10th, 2020, Belgium are top of the league, death per million 75.
Whose stats are these, Chris?
These are Statista.
Yeah, but I'm quoting the World Health Organization.
No, I don't follow the World Health Organization.
I'm quoting the WHO figures.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm looking at.
I think that's a bit more serious than something called Statista.
Well, these are 12 o'clock lunchtime today. Belgium has the first figures, followed by Spain, followed by Italy, followed by the United Kingdom.
Are we comparing apples with pears here, Chris? I'm talking about the deaths per million.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about, George. I'm talking about the deaths. I'm looking at the screen now.
I tweeted this before the show. You can scroll down on my Twitter feed. You can look at the figures. It's a bar chart, and it's, I'm afraid, indisputable that our deaths per million are over 60, and Sweden's are very close behind, and the United States very close behind them.
Well, not according to these figures.
Look on my Twitter feed, Chris. Look on my Twitter feed, and you'll see the WHO bar chart that I was referring to. Brambo says, since when did herd immunity get such a bad reputation? Seems to have served our species well for quite a few hundreds of thousands of years. Well, we've kind of come on, Brambo, you know. We kind of, since the Second World War and the death of fascist eugenics, we kind of feel responsible for the old and the weak. We kind of feel that it's, well, a bit primitive just to let the weaker members of the herd perish. Shahid says, send that bumbling Boris Johnson to the NHS to clean bedpans. Only then will he appreciate the life and death value of personal protection products. And Ola says, I didn't listen to him, I have to admit. I can't stand him. I thought there couldn't be a worse PM than May, but oh my, this one is the worst by far. No leadership at all. And on YouTube, Orion says, George, will you talk about all the protests in Germany, Australia and London? People have had enough, I think. Well, the protests in London were a couple of dozen people at most, and that included the journalists. I did see the American Taliban, armed to the teeth with automatic weapons, storming into various Capitol buildings in the various states, causing the governors to flee. Is that what you had in mind, Orion? Really? And on Instagram, Rob says the disaster is yet to come. And Tommy says no time for austerity during a global emergency. Let me take a quick break.
Radio Sputnik.
Tune in every Wednesday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker and John Kiriakou for a regular segment called Beyond Nuclear, where Brian and John discuss nuclear issues, including weapons, energy, waste, and the future of nuclear technology in the United States, with Kevin Camps, the radioactive waste watchdog at the organization Beyond Nuclear. Listen on Wednesdays right here on Radio Sputnik.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Now, Dr. Tim Walters joined us last week in advance of very important decisions being made around the world about the restarting of the football season. I wanted to hear from him an update on what's happening, partly because I'm missing the football so very, very much. And he kindly agreed to come on. Dr. Tim Walters is a professor at Okanagan College, but he's also a pretty ace football commentator. Tim, thanks for coming back. What can you do to update us on what's happening now on the football front?
Well, the Premier League clubs are meeting tomorrow, George. Originally, I think the plan as part of so-called Project Restart was that they were going to be voting on the official details of that plan, but it now seems that's going to be deferred because there's a bunch of dissent about how to bring football back. So they're just trying to essentially iron out the details of the general outline of the plan, which is to follow other leagues like the Bundesliga, which starts next weekend, in resuming play probably in June. At grounds across the country. Where those grounds will be is one of the things that they're arguing about. Playing the games behind closed doors, obviously. And I think the entire thing is a sort of catastrophic recipe for disaster, very much in keeping with the way that the Johnson government and footballing authorities have handled it so far. But unless there's some kind of massive upswell of opposition to this idea, I think that's the path that they seem to be heading on. I would imagine at some point within the next week or so, they'll be announcing dates and so forth of where things are going to resume.
Now, why are you so skeptical about it, and what would you do instead, Tim?
All right, well, it's a sort of complicated question. I'll start with the context. So I think that if and when we look back at the past couple of weeks and the way that the governments handle this across all different sectors, obviously, but focusing on football in particular, the thing that is going to become very clear is that March 11th was sort of a key date. On March 11th, the WHO declared that this was a pandemic. That same day, Boris Johnson went on Facebook and posted an interview from Downing Street, this fireplace chat with the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Jenny Harries, and specifically talked about why it was the case that football had not been shut down so far. So that same day, Liverpool played Atletico Madrid. The previous weekend, there had been a full slate of fixtures 3 and 4 days beforehand. The Manchester Derby happened that weekend. The Cheltenham Festival happened that weekend. And so medical experts have already begun to kind of crunch through the numbers. And a company called Edge Health out of the UK that supplies a lot of data analytics to the National Health Service have just focused on 3 of those events. So they focused on the Cheltenham Festival, where there was 150,000 people. They focused on the Manchester Derby, 73,000 people, and they focused on the Liverpool Atletico Champions League tie in Liverpool, 52,000 fans, 3,000 of which traveled from Spain. In Spain, they already would have been prohibited from attending a football match. So the analysis that they have come up with suggests that those events led to an increase in the 20 to 35 days later and the number of deaths in those communities of between 2.5 and almost 4 additional deaths per day. So that's just looking at 3 events, and that adds up, of course, in the weeks that have followed that. So I think that week is going to go down in football history as the period when the government and footballing authorities allowed policies to be enacted that led directly to the deaths of several hundred football fans, their family members, their friends, other people that live and work in the communities that surround those stadiums. Tomorrow is the 35th anniversary of the Bradford fire, where 56 fans lost their lives. We just had the 31st anniversary of the Hillsborough disaster, where 96 fans were murdered. Both of those horrible episodes were directly caused by government policies around football and by the treatment of fans by footballing authorities. And I think that the week before Johnson made that speech is going to go down in football history as the deadliest week when many hundreds of people unnecessarily lost their lives as a result of bad decision-making on the part of the authorities. And I think exactly that same logic that led to those unnecessary deaths is going to continue on even under a plan to play football behind closed doors. If you play football behind closed doors, you still need, as I talked about last week, upwards of 300 people, players, coaching staff, trainers, officials, media people, security people, et cetera, et cetera. There's not a way in which you can have tens of thousands of individual interactions that by definition cannot maintain social distancing rules, played in a condensed period of time that will maintain the safety of those workers, not just the players, but the other people in the stadium. And I think that the desire on the part of the government to bring people back so as to convey some semblance of normalcy and to be able to convey to people this completely delusional illusion that everything is okay is going to lead to the deaths of players and other workers in those stadiums. And that is completely avoidable, but seems to be the direction in which they're heading. And that's something that sort of, insofar as he actually said anything in the speech that your prime minister made a few hours ago, is very much in keeping, it seems to me, with the government's general policy, which is to pretend that everyone is in a lockdown, quarantine, while at the same time sort of covertly nudging everyone back to work so as to get the economic gears again. And to me, that is risking the lives of working people in ways that are absolutely unnecessary. Football players do not have to go to work. You were talking earlier about workplace safety and union regulations in your country that make it illegal for employers to force people back to work, and that is going to be exactly what's happening with football players. Bundesliga players at Dynamo Dresden have already tested positive since they resumed training. 3 Brighton players have tested positive, including a new player testing positive just yesterday. So I think it's completely unnecessary and to be avoided at all costs. I do have a kind of alternative to the proposed plan that I have been advocating for the past month. You can read it on sportingintelligence.com or on my Twitter at Tim L. Walters. And
I'll definitely do that, and I hope you'll come back maybe next week, Tim, when we know what the Premier League has finally decided. I'm very grateful to you for that update, and everyone should check sportingintelligence.com and follow you on Twitter at
Tim L. Walters.
Tim L. Walters. Dr. Walters, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, did the Prime Minister's message make you feel A, safer? 19%. B, less safe? 81%. Wow, that is amazing. That poll's closing in 7 minutes. You can still vote on my Twitter feed. Let's take a call from Luke in the Wirral. Go ahead, Luke.
Hello, George. Good evening, mate.
Good evening. Nice to hear from you. Go ahead.
Yeah, you too. Basically, I want to get straight to the point. You know, all this money printing that goes on with the quantitative easing, you know, when the banks need the handout from all us taxpayers.
Yeah.
And obviously they get it every time. That there's no, you know, we don't really have sort of a say in it, do we? So they just get it. And but now we're in a pandemic. We're in this awful situation where people are dying all over the world and everything. But would it be all right if they can do a bit of money printing for us, you know, to keep the furlough going so we can stay at home and keep
it's
people
absurd.
safe?
Look, it's funny money already. So the 80% of your wages figure was just plucked randomly from the money tree. It was equally possible for him to underwrite 100% of your wages. You don't have to go to work because we don't think it's safe for you to do so, but you won't lose money. We'll pay you 100%, or you could have paid 110% because it's all quantitatively eased money. That's the reality. Now, they like to suggest that there is a moral hazard in giving you 100% of your wages, and from Tuesday, I understand, not even 80% of your wages. There's a moral hazard in that because that'll make you lazy, look. That'll make you work shy. But there's no moral hazard in giving banks hundreds and hundreds of billions of pounds. Billions. No moral hazard at all involved in that.
Trillions of dollars, trillions.
Yeah, well, across the globe, yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
look, the time is our enemy. I love talking to you. Forgive me, I need to press on to Terry in Los Angeles. Go ahead, Terry.
Hey, George, good to talk to you.
And you, sir.
The last few weeks have kind of showed the progressives have just collapsed, basically, and they're just giving in to everything Pelosi and Schumer want. I mean, you can see what's going to happen here. They're supposedly, Schumer says it's going to be a Rooseveltian plan. Anything that this guy and Pelosi comes up with is going to be bad. I mean, we just know that. So what I just wanted to find out is what you think is causing Sanders and the progressives just to sort of collapse. Because I remember when I was in the Democratic Party here in California back in the 90s, I was fighting against NAFTA. And the Democratic Party actually would say, shut up and sit down. Even the people in the audience. It was ridiculous. And so I was doing business with Mexico, and when NAFTA passed, within 2 weeks, Citibank took their currency from 3 pesos to the dollar to 7. Doubled prices of everything. I did no more work in Mexico. I sold no more products for 20 years. So you can see exactly how that system works. So anyway, what do you think they did to
that's a wonderful call, Terry. It's just a pity I need to go to the news very shortly. But my first thought is I wish I had been born in America, because if I had been, I'd be running for president right now, because the current situation is screaming out for someone who can string a few words together at least, who knows where they are at least, who can speak English, who knows what needs to be done. Because now that Sanders has run away, and there's no other word for that, he ran away right at the point where the US economy was in free fall, heading for 1930s style collapse, where food lines, as Garland Nixon just talked about, miles of food lines, people queuing for miles to get free food. And when the leaders of the Democratic and Republican Party are not just two cheeks of the same backside, they're two clowns in the same circus. It's screaming out for someone like Governor Jesse Ventura to enter the race as a strong man, as a man that knows what needs to be done, with a record and with a program. And that's what we don't have, Terry.
Yeah, exactly. I think Ventura has said he's not going to run now, but people need to just clamor for him to get back in, because
I hope so.
You know, it'd be finally nice to not have to vote for the lesser of two evils.
Well,
and that's what we've been doing for decades.
I gave that up a long time ago. If you vote for the lesser of two evils, you're still voting for evil. And you're making sure that next time round, the choice will be even more pernicious, even more evil, because if they know that you'll vote for evil, as long as it's slightly less evil than the other guy, then why should they put up anybody that isn't evil? Terry, thanks. A wonderful call. Okay, the Prime Minister's poll is done. 81% of you feel less safe. 19% of you feel safer. Here's the new poll. Should UK care homes be nationalised? A, yes. B, no. This is my own personal campaign, and I'm asking everybody to get behind it. Should UK care homes be nationalised? A, yes. B, no. You can vote now on my Twitter feed. Let's get the news update with the wonderful Jamie Lowe.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Prophets, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
It's time to double down with Max and Stacy.
Yeah, double down. We're talking markets, finance, business, economics, ka-ching, bling, just about everything money related on Sputnik. It's called Double Down.
We're asking, are dead cats bouncing or have fundamentals changed? That's this week on Double Down.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has told the nation that lockdown will continue, stating that the 5 tests for ending the current lockdown have not yet been met, but some measures are to be relaxed. People who aren't able to work from home, for example in construction and manufacturing, are now being encouraged to go to work, and schools and non-essential shops could be open from as early as June the 1st. From Wednesday, people will be able to undertake an unlimited amount of exercise, but the Prime Minister warned of increased fines if social distancing is not followed. He also stated that it would soon be time to impose quarantine on people travelling to the country by air, but how soon was unclear. In his address to the nation, Boris Johnson has, however, unveiled a 5-tier COVID alert system to rank the threat from coronavirus. The system is designed to mirror the independent terror alert system, which ranks the threat to the public from low to critical and helps decide what protective measures are required. The system will be run by a new joint biosecurity centre who will decide the level of threat from 1 to 5 based on the rate of infection and the number of new cases of COVID-19. Britain's Community Secretary Robert Jenrick is defending the government's update of the coronavirus message, which is being criticised for being vague. It's changed from stay at home to stay alert, control the virus, save lives. However, the stay-at-home advice remains for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said in a press conference earlier that she didn't know what stay alert means. She added that for Scotland, given the fragility of progress made so far, it would be catastrophic to drop the stay-at-home message. She's criticised the UK government's message as vague and imprecise. Meanwhile, former US President Barack Obama is strongly criticising his successor Donald Trump over his response to the coronavirus crisis. In a private conference call, he called the US handling of the pandemic an absolute chaotic disaster. His remarks were made while encouraging former staff to work for Joe Biden's presidential election team. During the call, Obama said Trump's approach to government was partly to blame for the US response to coronavirus. The White House says in response that President Trump's unprecedented action has saved American lives. More than 77,000 people have now died, and the US has 1.2 million confirmed coronavirus cases, both by far the highest in the world. Staying stateside now, and President Trump has hailed the first major professional sports event in America after 2 months, a mixed martial arts contest, as an important step as US states start to ease the lockdown restrictions. It began with a pre-recorded message from Trump standing outside the White House. The fights took place without fans in Jacksonville, Florida on Saturday night and were broadcast on ESPN. Tesla boss Elon Musk has threatened to pull the firm's headquarters and only US car factory out of California after local officials stopped the company from reopening the electric vehicle plant. He tweeted saying it's the final straw and that Tesla will now move its HQ and future programs to Nevada immediately. Tesla also filed a lawsuit against Alameda County, accusing the county health department of overstepping federal and state pandemic restrictions when it blocked the car maker from restarting productions at its factory in Fremont. And finally, a French surfer has survived after being bitten by a shark in Australia by punching it twice when it attacked him at Bells Beach in Victoria. 23-year-old Dylan Nakas escaped with minor injuries to his legs and required stitches for a few puncture wounds. A second surfer nearby said he started screaming and thought he was messing around in the water. He then realised that the Frenchman wasn't joking and rushed in to help. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, not since Dr. Kildare has a doctor captured the hearts of the British public like the Moats medic Dr. Ranjeet Brar. At least the female half of the population all seem to want to marry him, and the male half all want to listen to him also. And some of them also would like to marry him. His clip with me last week on the issue of a virus, of a vaccine rather, and whether or not China would get one, whether or not the British would buy it if they did, is the hottest clip ever produced by the mother of all talk shows in, 47 weeks of the show. And so I'm always grateful when I see him back on the screen, particularly in situ, as I understand he is this evening. Dr. Ranjeet, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. Now, as I said earlier, the clip we did last week has attracted such a lot of attention, a lot of it negative. There is kind of madness in the air about vaccines, and I'd like to begin by asking you about that. Some people don't seem to know that polio was eliminated from the world by a vaccine, that measles vaccines and smallpox vaccines and so on are perfectly routine and perfectly proper instruments of healthcare. Why has it come to pass that a mass movement exists in the world hating, fearing vaccines?
Thanks, George. Good to be back with you. There's a few components to this answer, and it's once again partly medical and mainly of political nature. So vaccines have been one of the few great success stories of medicine. The learning to work with the immune system, to create immunity prior to exposure, and therefore to obviate the real morbidity and mortality of diseases. And the classic one to think of is smallpox. Smallpox was a disease to which Native Americans in the United States were entirely naive. They'd never seen it. And we talked a little bit about the book Guns, Germs and Steel by Jared Diamond, and I can't go into the whole thing now. But part of the extermination of the Native Americans, the stealing of their land, was the deliberate giving to them of blankets that were infected with smallpox. This is a virus, it's a DNA virus, but it's a virus. Much, much later, this was a scourge, a worldwide scourge, that the World Health Organization successfully eradicated or coordinated a program of eradication via vaccination. So we know vaccination works and remains one of the great success stories of medicine. But now, of course, we've moved beyond that stage. My children, as a child, had vaccinations for tuberculosis, a bacteria, for many different kinds of viral illnesses, including meningitis, measles, mumps, and rubella. Now, there was a researcher at my medical school, in fact, when I was at medical school, at the Royal Free Medical School, who was doing some research and queried whether there was a link between a vaccine for MMR and for autism. In fact, that was never proven, but his ideas became a celebrity cause, particularly in the United States and particularly amongst Hollywood. And there's been an anti-vaccination movement there to the extent that measles has reappeared as a major epidemic in many areas of the developed world because people are not wanting, sorry, George, not wanting to have vaccination. More than that, there's a question of a link between these very large medical industry and drugs in general and the way in which they promote them and develop them, and whether that is, in many cases, there's a conflicting interest between the need of a multi-billion-dollar company to generate profit and the need of the health industry and the medical personnel to take care of the population. And it's that conflicting need, it's that conflicting interest that has led to some vaccines which were not safe being used in trials, some medicines which were not safe being used in trials, and particularly populations in the third world being vulnerable to unscrupulous medical practices, particularly in the wake of the Nazis. We celebrated the victory in Europe Day on 8th and 9th of this month, so yesterday and the day before, when fascism was defeated, but particularly the medical practices of the fascist doctors, the German Nazi doctors who performed quite inhuman and unethical experiments upon the civilian population, led to something called the Helsinki Declaration, in which we were supposed to eliminate these practices. But in various states and for various reasons and under the profit motive, many medical companies have been caught out in unethical practices. And I think it's for this reason that people are extremely suspicious. They have seen that whatever situation happens, the prevailing powerful orthodox elite within business or within government, and that affects all spheres of human activity, from food production to construction. Not to say that there's anything wrong with eating food, nothing wrong with living in houses, and there's nothing wrong with medicine, but the way in which it's administered and developed is often seen to be opaque and against the interests of the mass of the population. And I think for these reasons people are extremely skeptical, and they rightly point out, for example, if you look at the Jenner Institute and AstraZeneca, who are collaborating to try and develop a vaccine, they have gone into mass production before they have the tests of their vaccine. Now, they're very much hoping that that mass production will be backed up by the fact that their vaccine works. But of course, there'll be tremendous commercial pressures having invested in, and I saw an interesting interview with a professor from the Jenner Institute at Oxford University saying that they were planning to have billions of vaccines ready to go, if you like, at the point that they'll have their results back. But will they then have tremendous pressure on them to say that the vaccine works or is safer than it is? Obviously, that will be a conflicting pressure. And so for this reason, I think there's a degree of skepticism. But, the technology of vaccination is a fantastic technology. It does offer a way out. But it's as old as, the father of medicine. We'll take the Hippocratic Oath. Hippocrates, a famous Roman physician, famously said, "First, do no harm." And I think that's where the NHS and institutions like it, which don't charge money, have a tremendous degree of trust and respect from the population of Britain. Where socialised medicine has a degree of trust from the population, which is not seen in extreme systems of private health. And there are many examples where private health in India or in the United States has oversupplied unnecessary care because it makes money rather than delivers health outcomes. And I think it's that contradiction, which is a political contradiction, which clouds people's judgment on the question of vaccination.
Well, that's an argument for taking profit and taking private interest out of medicine altogether, isn't it? I'm campaigning now, my poll is on it at the moment, on taking care homes into public ownership, making them part of, if you like, the medical and social care furniture in the country. We ought to bring the pharmaceutical industry into public ownership. And if we did, we wouldn't just be guarding against unethical behaviour by drug companies. We'd be saving the National Health Service a fantastic amount of money.
I think that's absolutely right, George. In the National Health Service, people can very clearly see they're so grateful that they can turn up, receive care, irrespective of their financial needs. But of course, all they see is very undemocratic. If they turn up extremely ill and they're turned away and were to suffer ill health, negative consequences or die in the case of needing emergency care, that's absolutely the case for care homes. It's absolutely the case for a large number of other vital social services which are needed by all working people. And in the last analysis, why should it be that all wealth, all mechanisms of generating wealth are in private hands and all mechanisms of generating debt are in public hands? It can't carry on. If you look at the NHS budget, which goes up year on year, and politicians are always claiming that they're spending more on the NHS, that they're giving more than ever before, not only is it actually relatively unresourced, because we spend about 8% of our GDP as opposed to 12% of other nations on the NHS, but a huge amount of money goes directly through the NHS to private companies, and 25 billion or so goes directly through the NHS into the realms of private drug companies. Private drug companies, therefore, have an interest in promoting relatively new, relatively expensive drugs, and neglecting research on relatively old but efficacious and drugs that they can't make a lot of money on. So there's a direct conflict of interest. Similarly with new technologies, similarly with the PFI, 10 billion for the NHS, and over the lifetime of the NHS, we'll have to pay back 90 billion for the 12 billion that we borrowed. So there's a huge amount of exploitation that goes on by the NHS. And the remarkable thing, when we look at how disastrous has been the strategy of testing and the strategy of providing PPE, vastly undersupplied to the NHS, failure to prepare for the pandemic, which had been anticipated. We know there was this Operation Cygnus just in 2016. What we found out that all of this sourcing of adequate testing and adequate PPI was actually farmed out under the new laws passed by this government in response, allegedly, to the coronavirus, to private companies, to management consultancies who charged hundreds they employed thousands of consultants, each at thousands of pounds an hour, to mismanage this crisis. So this crisis has been used to further the agenda, the pre-existing agenda of privatisation of the NHS. Boris, when he came out from hospital, spoke in glowing terms about nurses who had looked after him in the care of the NHS. But whereas you were hopeful this might be a sign that he was planning to support the NHS, it's very clear, actually, the more you look behind the actions taken by the government, they are using this crisis to push their pre-existing agenda. And I think when people see that pre-existing agenda being pushed, it's then that they start imagining that this is a conspiracy. Of course, it's not a conspiracy. Coronavirus is real. It's a real threat. It's a real danger. And the consequences of coming out of lockdown early, I feel, are severe. But what you can really see, the conspiracy is against the working people, and everything is being run in the interests of big business and of private profit, George.
And lastly, briefly, if you will, the statement by the Prime Minister this evening, only 19% of those polled by us felt safer at the end of his speech than they felt at the beginning. Where do you stand on that?
I'm with the 80% on this, George. I mean, I don't like being in lockdown. I very much enjoy going outside. But I think the way to come out of lockdown is to eradicate the virus in the population, as has been done in China. We're very keen not to learn the lessons of adequate testing, adequate tracing. And when we bring up tracing, I'm afraid the government doesn't have the ability, it seems, to employ people to pick up the phone of people who have, and phone those who've had a positive test, go and visit them, find out who were the people around them who they've been in contact with. That's the way to trace. What they're coming out with are big tech solutions which are extremely intrusive, where data from the NHS will now be shared with GCHQ. And of course, that makes people rightly suspicious of their motives. Whereas the simple measures of testing, finding out where the virus is and protecting the population, I'm afraid these were the things that were neglected. And coming out, when we are still seeing that there are hundreds of deaths a day, a few fewer deaths, but hundreds of deaths a day, when we're still seeing that our ITUs have many patients, our hospitals have many patients, I'm operating on patients who have this virus, I'm caring for patients on the ward who have this virus. If we come out of lockdown and we're forcing people back to work in a vulnerable situation, then we will see, I'm afraid, another spike in deaths. And it's worth pointing out that, in fact, bus drivers per capita of the population have a higher risk than doctors. So frontline workers will not be immune from this situation, George. So I think it's early to come out of lockdown, but more importantly, I think the correct measures that could really have controlled the virus have not been taken.
Well, he said tonight, Doctor, and I'm quoting him directly, anyone who can't work from home should be actively encouraged to go to work. And that's a potential death sentence on workers going into what by any standards are potentially lethal environments.
It is, George, and we've seen that this is not just the disease of the elderly. 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds can and are dying. We've seen, in order to clear space within the hospitals to treat people with coronavirus, we've funneled people into care homes, and it means that there's a prevalence of the disease in the community, which we're not sure what it is, but it's definitely still present. And once the population starts moving around freely again, there will be another increase. And it is a falsehood to say that it's our response to the coronavirus that's called the economic crash. The economic crash and the consequences of that are there, and it's the businesses that have been bailed out, and by pursuing this move, it's going to be further reducing the support available to working people, forcing them back to work, yes, in an unsafe situation.
Thank you very much, as always, Dr. Ranjeet Brar, doctor and physician, surgeon and Moats medic. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's take a call from Larry in Hartlepool, whose family work in the NHS. Go ahead, Larry.
Hello, George. Pleasure to speak to you. Totally love your show. Thank all the staff behind you for giving you the platform to speak.
Thank you.
I'm absolutely livid tonight, George. I can't believe I'm having this phone call, but I'll just say how it is, and it's very painful, so I do appreciate that certain people might find this a hard call to take. But I've got 6 members in the family who all work in different parts, NHS care homes. 2 of them in the care homes have luckily only had mild symptoms and got away with the virus. PPE was a problem, obviously. 4 other members certain members work in senior parts of the NHS, so I've got to watch what I'm saying here. But basically, 2 members work on the ambulance service, and obviously they've seen some horrendous scenes. PPE was not a problem at the start. They were well equipped, but unfortunately as time went on with this virus, things obviously started to run out. Luckily donations were given by members of the public who were making visors, etc., etc., etc. So they were managing. But I got a phone call last night from a member of my family who was a manager in the ambulance service, and unfortunately he's had to resign, which has broke my heart as a family. But at the same time, he has been down with the virus, recovered, not tested, told to go back to work. He works in a very dark side of this virus, which I'll say no better words than the mortuary department. Frontline ICU, plenty of PPE. them left with next to nothing, George. And what the issue is here is a member of my family had to resign, had extreme words with chief executives, managers above him, but he basically looks after staff from the ambulance service. They have to deal with going to care homes, and obviously there's been a lot of hush-hush on a lot of things, which I'll go into later. But I'm just absolutely appalled, George.
It's shocking. I saw earlier today, Larry, an NHS nurse who has also resigned after 6 weeks without even hand gel, never mind PPE. These people are staying at work on the front line, many of them risking their life to go to work. And now, according to Johnson, everybody who can't work from home has to do the same.
Well, from my personal point of view, from my family, as I say, one member of family, and I don't want to go down the conspiracy theorist line, but this is true, and I will speak to you in full matter of words off air at a later date through your website. But basically, one family member, and this is in January, George, was involved in the testing side. They didn't know what they were taking down in a police escort, done at night, all hush-hush. Now, this person in my family deals with transplant runs, so under police escort. But then to be told at night, because sometimes they take samples as well to labs, to be taken from one side of the country, and this was in January, George, all the way done under night, and then recently, Army involved in the escort. So the government knew a hell of a lot before they told us, which we all know now. But also at the same time, it's only recently in the newspapers that this story was picked up on, and now obviously it's all done locally now, because obviously labs have been branched out.
Yeah, although 55,000 tests were sent all the way to the United States to be analysed. Larry, I've got to press on. I'm grateful for your call, and God protect your family members on the front line. Chris is in Colchester. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm getting a different take about things with regard to just working people, everyday people that they've had enough of this situation, and a lot of people are, like small businesses, I'm hearing, on the verge of destruction.
Sure.
And a lot of people are already depressed of this situation. They don't want to get back to work. But I think what I do take into consideration and think is important is I think we've...
Can you just hold your phone properly? Don't block the mouthpiece, as it were. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, what I think we do need to take into consideration, and I do appreciate, is I think we've decimated the health service, both parties, and that is a big part of this, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
And then, but with regards to lockdown, Japan was the second country to get coronavirus. They haven't locked down. They've taken some measures, but they've had 600 deaths out of 128 million people. But I think there's more to it than the virus. I think it is a lot to do with how our country is just a mess, I'm afraid.
Yes, that would be the leitmotif of this evening's show. Our country is just a mess. That's perfectly put, Chris. Thanks very much for that call. Lar says on Twitter, this government has always put profit before people, and tonight's statement from Johnson is clear evidence of this. Johnson has a lot of blood on his hands already, and after tonight's statement, he'll have a lot more. And Dan says, travel vouchers are useless. There's also the very real possibility that they'll never be honoured, as some travel firms and operators may become insolvent. Flights were not honoured. Despite this not being their fault, refunds must be issued. And Samson says, you asked why there was no airport restriction. The Times ran a story in the past few days which noted that the aviation and tourism industry warned the government that any restrictions would have serious implications for business. They also felt this would expunge lingering hopes that Britons would still take their summer holidays abroad this year. This is as deluded as it is callous, but I think it may help answer your question. Thanks, Samson, it does. Vob says, it's hopeless. I can't begin to express how bad it is to put the onus on employees to judge whether they are safe at work or not. Employers will leave many with no choice. What Johnson is doing should be criminal. And Steve says, who's changed, me or you? I find I'm agreeing with you more and more. Well, maybe both of us, Steve, let's call it quits on that and just agree to be friends. Alice says, say what you will, George Galloway knows the pandemic is real and has the sense not to run around screaming Chinese virus. More than I can say for the people I respected 2 months ago. You and me both, Alice. Gary says, if Boris told me the grass was green, I'd be straight onto Google. And Twitter user says, are we going to be supplied with alertometers from a dodgy warehouse in Turkey? This reference, of course, to the huge multi-million purchase of gowns from Turkey that turned out to be so substandard they could not be used. And Lara again says, back to work, catch the virus, save the billionaires. This should be the new slogan from the government after Johnson's statement tonight. How brilliant. OK, the poll's still running. Should UK care homes be nationalised? A, yes, 84%. B, no, 16%. You can vote on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. And Phil by email says, will the MPs be returning to fill the Commons before the rest of us return to work? If it's good enough for us, it's good enough for them. That is a very powerful point, Phil, to which I add only this. The MPs got a £10,000 bonus not to come to work, on top of their already handsome salaries, of course. And Luke says one can almost picture the spin merchant Dominic Cummings suggesting, what if, Prime Minister, we simply created the illusion of a lockdown? Why else would the airports allow so many to enter without constraint? Because the plan all along was for the herd to become immune to the ghastly tapestry of strains of COVID-19. And Joe says, George, keep speaking up for us, the working class. You are our only voice. Thank you, Joe. That moved me there. I must say, let me take a quick break.
Radio Sputnik.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Profits, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Radio Sputnik, we speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Now, Joanne Naeri Josen says, surprised, George, that you don't mention the kidnapping of Maduro by mercenaries. Well, it's partly pressure of time, Joanne, but mainly because Maduro didn't get kidnapped, because the socialist fishermen on the coast of Venezuela and the popular militias put paid to the pernicious attempt to kidnap the president of Venezuela, and more power to their elbows. Now, Hall of Fame time. In 1941, Britain stood alone, having miraculously extricated its armies from France at Dunkirk, having repulsed the Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain and withstood the German aerial blitz on our cities. But we were to be joined, involuntarily to begin with, by the Soviet Union. In June, rather than attack Britain as everyone expected, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the then Soviet Union, aimed at wiping out the Slavic people, along with communism, grabbing the oil fields, the land, and repopulate it with German, along with slave labor. Lebensraum, living room, Hitler called it. It was the largest military invasion in history. It saw the war's longest battles and the worst atrocities. All that stood against Hitler and effectively world domination was the Soviet Red Army. To begin with, it seemed that the Axis would sweep all the way to Moscow. The German armies took 5 million Red Army soldiers prisoner, the vast majority of whom never returned alive. The Nazis deliberately starved to death or otherwise killed 3.3 million of these prisoners of war, and a vast number of civilians, as their hunger plan worked towards the extermination of the entire Slavic population. Mass shootings and gassing operations carried out by the Nazis or their willing collaborators, the children of whom are in power in many post-Soviet societies today, like the Baltics, like the Ukraine. And this mass shooting, gassing operations, deliberate enslavement, also murdered over 1 million Soviet Jews. 1 million Soviet Jews. Gang rapes went unmonitored and entirely unpunished. The Nazis expected a military pushover by their highly trained and mechanized troops, but the Red Army fought fiercely and indomitably for every inch of ground, defending as they were their motherland. And through horrendous losses and epic bravery, they eventually stalled Operation Barbarossa around a dozen miles short of Moscow, and then began a winter attack to recover territory. There is a memorial which marks the spot where Barbarossa failed and the war began to turn, marking in April 1942 the second great historical retreat from Moscow, mirroring Napoleon's famous retreat more than 100 years before. The most famous battle, the greatest battle of the war, the greatest battle of any war, dwarfing even that of Moscow, is the monumental one for Stalingrad. It lasted from July 1942 to February 1943, when the Red Army finally broke back and crushed the German infantry. They recovered 250,000 German and Romanian corpses, although the total death toll is believed to exceed 800,000. Red Army casualties, dead, wounded, missing, or captured, was more than 1 million soldiers in one battle. And these are lives, of course, not just numbers. The historic capital of Russia, St. Petersburg, then called Leningrad, was besieged for 872 days, from September 1941 to January 1944. The blockade claimed the lives of 650,000 Leningraders in 1942 alone, mostly from starvation and disease. Corpses froze in the street. And people were so hungry they boiled shoe leather for soup and burned furniture to keep warm and barely alive. More died in the 4 years on the Eastern Front than in all other combat across the globe in all of World War II. In what's called Russia's Great Patriotic War, the Red Army lost 8.6 million soldiers and more than 18 million Soviet citizens also perished. Destruction was monumental, with 1,700 towns and 70,000 villages razed to the ground. Of the 17 million German soldiers who fought on the Eastern Front against the Red Army, 5.5 million died. 4/5 of all Nazi military personnel casualties in the war were inflicted by the Red Army. The Red Army, their blood, their bravery and sacrifice, and the resistance of the Soviet peoples changed the course of the war, crushed Nazism, and saved not just Britain, not just Europe, but the world, and preserved civilization on our planet. It was VE Day in Britain on Friday. It would not have been a victory at all without the Red Army. And so this week's exceptional entrance into the mother of all talk shows' Hall of Fame are the victorious Red Army. Glory to the Red Army, and we shall never forget their bravery, their sacrifice, their victory. Whatever our governments, whatever our media try to do, we will preserve their memory. And the wall of shame is one that I thought long and hard about. Because in a way, he's such a pushover, you might think it's not important to mention. The reason why Hitlerism and Nazism became so strong and so powerful as to inflict this catastrophe on the entire globe was the appeasement of the beast of fascism when it could have been stopped. The appeasement of Mussolini in Abyssinia, the appeasement of Tojo, and the rape and mass murder in China. The appeasement of Hitler as he broke rule, law after law after law after law, and was allowed to do so and was colluded with by the leaders of Britain and France. Stalin offered to send 1 million soldiers to guard the frontiers of Europe against Hitlerism and was rejected by the governments of France and Britain. And Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, actually went to Munich and made a pact with Hitler. Imagine a Chamberlain-Hitler pact, a Britain-Germany pact, a pact with Hitler and Nazi ideology and intention. And this was 11 months before the pact between Ribbentrop and Molotov, about which we hear so much. The Soviet Union had no alternative but to sign such a pact, because Britain and France had already signed their own pact with Hitler, handing over Czechoslovakia to Hitler, who then dismembered and dispersed the country, giving a part of it to Poland, something else they never mention, setting Slovakia as a protectorate and militarily occupying, completely subsuming the Czech Republic as now is. This is what Chamberlain's pact delivered to Adolf Hitler. And so his name will forever be linked with the word appeasement. Neville Chamberlain returned from meeting Hitler in Munich, waving a peace agreement, guaranteeing what he claimed was peace in our time. In 1939, Hitler responded by invading the remaining part of Czechoslovakia, which hadn't already been given to him by the British and the French in the Chamberlain-Hitler Pact. The Führer, as we know, didn't take the agreement seriously, or the other signatory to it. He said of Chamberlain at the time, "If ever that silly old man comes interfering here again with his umbrella, I'll kick him downstairs and jump on his stomach in front of the photographers." Winston Churchill summed it up succinctly. England has been offered a choice between war and shame. She has chosen shame and will get war. So Neville Chamberlain joins our roll of dishonor on the wall of shame. Should UK care homes be nationalised? Yes, 84%. No, 16%. Vote now on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Let's take some calls. Here's one on Venezuela. Mike in South Carolina. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, George. Great to talk to you again.
And you, sir.
Yeah, it is Orwellian what they're doing as far as rewriting history of the USSR and Russia. And organization, but it's also a crime what's happening in Venezuela at the direction of the United States. Our president here, who welcomed Juan Guaido into the State of the Union address as the president of Venezuela, who put a price on Maduro's head, which has led to this coup attempt by these mercenaries who went down there and tried to, capture, the Maduro, the actual president of the country. Amidst all the sanctions and the stealing of all of Venezuela's assets, which your country is also involved in, as far as the gold that they have in the British banks, and then you also you have all of these things being brought to bear on this country. The sanctions that have killed probably 50,000 people down there before we even start with the COVID virus. I mean, it's insane that these people, these mercenaries, go down there and they do this. Many of them killed, a couple captured, and those that are captured, give you the documents, where Juan Guaido has signed off on this, and they didn't do this without the support of the American government.
What is amazing, Mike, what is amazing is that it wasn't just with the support of the American government, but with the official opposition to the American government. The Democrats are supporting every act of aggression against the government of Venezuela.
How can this pass through the news with just crickets? Nobody's talking about it, and this ought to be front and center of everything that's happening, because it's just another example of how empire is working to overturn the will of the people in South America, just like it always has.
Brilliant call, Mike. Brilliant, brilliant call. Thank you very much for making it. Laura is in Pembrokeshire on the Boris Johnson issue. Go ahead, Laura.
Hi, George.
Hi.
I have a question, actually, and it is, what do we think it would actually take for a British Prime Minister to resign in this day and age?
It's a very good question. I can't understand why Mike Hancock, the Health Secretary, has survived, I must say. He's got front-line responsibility for a series of blunder after blunder after blunder. But there does seem evidence, Laura, that Boris himself is coming under pressure now, both from the public opinion numbers in terms of this lockdown, where 90% of the people of Britain are against the policy that he just announced this evening. And inside the Tory party, you've got people who are angry at Johnson for not going even further in sending our people into death traps. So maybe Boris Johnson's position is beginning to be a little less secure. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I keep seeing figures of around 50% of British voters are in favour of Johnson. And I also saw how many lies were told in the campaign for the recent election, and how many, it seems like how many lies that get told all the time and figures that are wrong and all of that kind of stuff. I just feel like personal political integrity and culpability seems to have disappeared in this country.
I think you're right. I think you're right. You're absolutely right about that. And people keep coming back from disgrace. You would have thought after the Chilcot inquiry, for example, that you would never see Tony Blair's face again. But in fact, Tony Blair is on the television more than almost anyone else in this country. And he's calling all the shots inside the opposition Labour Party. His man, I say his Pinocchio, that he fashioned, is now the leader and unchallengeable. So you're right. I mean, standards have definitely slipped.
And things that would have had to have come to light, such as the Russian report, the investigation into Boris's dealings with Jennifer Arcuri seems to have been shelved. All sorts of things like that would have, not gone unnoticed before as being a scandal that needs to be addressed. Now, I almost feel like Boris Johnson is bombarding us with so many scandals that we can't keep up, and none of them get looked into.
Well, of course, we're supposed to have a fourth estate in government, in political life, in public life. That fourth estate being the journalists and the broadcasters. But they have allowed these things. That Russia report you refer to, and the Arcuri report. Why are journalists not asking where these reports are?
I think some are, but it seems to be lost in the ocean of
And it's the same on the other side of the ocean, isn't it? It's the same in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you almost, this is slightly off topic in a way, but you almost see like the whole Jeremy Corbyn anti-Semitism thing is mirrored with Bernie Sanders. It's bizarre how things are mirrored across.
Yeah, and it worked. It worked in both cases. Laura, thanks for that lovely call. Glenn is in Carlisle. Let's hear him. Go ahead, Glenn.
Hi, George. Great to speak to you. Thanks for having us on the show. I do really appreciate it.
Welcome.
I would also take the opportunity to commend you as well, as a member of the Workers' Party of Britain, commend you on your talk you gave on yesterday night about the heroic victory of the Red Army.
Thank you, yeah. People can still watch that, by the way, Glenn. They can still watch that on my Facebook page and on my YouTube page. This was a public meeting we had last night commemorating the victory of the Red Army on the 9th of May. Glenn, thanks for that. Go ahead.
Yes, no, like that, I have to commend you on it. It's very moving and very, well deserved and,
Thank you.
Brilliantly put across. I have to say, I've been starting to share it with my friends, and I've encouraged them to watch it.
Thank you, sir.
And it's entirely right. We should commemorate it, as you say, because without it, swastikas might be hanging from our windows today. It might have been done so for the last 75 years.
Exactly. Maybe until now. Until now. Yeah.
Yeah. The reason I called, and the main reason I wanted to speak to you this evening was, I mean, partly some of all of the comments I think show how bafflingly naive and willfully ignorant some people have been about this, which astonishes. I mean, it astonished me to begin with. It astonishes me even now. How willfully ignorant, how almost as you said, defying of all rationality, like Broadmoor levels of denial and naivety about it, which us astonished. Thankfully, they seem to be in a minority, but it is a minority.
Yeah. They've got a big voice on social media. They make a lot of noise, but actually they're a very small percentage of the public.
Yeah, which I think they're fueled by people's lack of trust in the government these days and people's lack of trust in experts, as Ranjeet was intimating before, quite rightly. And, people have a right to distrust the government, but it seems that people can't hear evidence and can't hear factual information when it's staring them in the face. Such as the
and there are malign actors, you know. There are people who fill their boots from the stirring up of that kind of madness. There are people who sell DVDs and books and fill halls and make a lot of money on both sides of the Atlantic from these insane conspiracy theories. But it's by and large down to what you just identified. That our people are so distrustful of authority and government because of having been burned so badly, so many times, by government and systemic lying and deceit, that they are not prepared to, without going on to Google, believe if Boris says the grass is green, they want to double check it. Glenn, thanks for that call, a wonderful one. James, probably the last call of the evening, maybe not, is in Collingwood. Go ahead, James.
Hello, George. I'm glad to say that I'm a long-term listener and a fan of yours, and I appreciate your encouraging Jesse Ventura.
Oh, I love Jesse. I love him. He's a good friend of mine. I'd love to see him run for president.
I'm very appreciative of the fact that you're doing the best you can for Julian Assange. That's a travesty, an offense against British justice. It's just awful that he's in that jail.
Absolutely.
But do what you can. My point is that the companies, and particularly the United States governments, but other governments, seem to want to get their economies going before we get deeper into a depression.
Yeah.
And the thing that they want to do is, and they have done as they did 11 years ago, they produce a bunch of money, a huge amount of money, and give it to the companies and give it to the banks. And what they ought to do is give that money share and share alike to the individual citizens. It is the only way to get the economy going and give the money to the people so they're not forced to go into employment in things that are not safe. And the governments could do that. If they're going to, as they have done, they're putting new money into the system, and they should give it each share to every citizen. If they're going to not get into a depression, they're going to have to support the money supply, and that's something that they never talk about.
Absolutely.
It's the cure for the depression.
Brilliant call. Maybe the best call of the night. James in Canada. Thank you very much for it. I need to cut you off because there's a legend on the line. And everybody knows the rules here. When a legend appears on the line, everything else has to be cleared. It is, of course, the wonderful Norma in Bristol. Norma, last call.
George.
Welcome.
Hello. Well, there's so much depressing news at the moment that I wanted to just suggest two more of the Hall of Fame. Now, I've mentioned him before, but I watched this film on the Amazon Prime, Pavarotti film, and, you know, it's a real must-see. I mean, okay, we all agree that he had a magnificent voice, Luciano Pavarotti.
It's the voice of God. It's the voice of God, Norma.
But, you know, he did so much more for society. And in this film, which is 1.5 hours long, he's helped with all the people that are poorer all around the world in different circumstances. And, I mean, he gave us such joy of living that I thought it was good to mention it in this depressing time.
It's on our short list, that I promise you.
I've got another one, though, just very quickly. It's a much more serious one. Florence Nightingale. She did so much to reform the nursing service, and she was a very determined woman, and at this time I thought, well, I'd mention her as well.
Well, of course, and she saw the horrors of the war in Crimea. And saw the state of the provision made for the poor bloody infantry sent into the more of war for reasons which were unfathomable at the time and are now lost in the mists of history. And she and several other pioneers that we can return to, maybe we'll put together a few of those and elevate them to the Hall of Fame. Two good suggestions, Norma. Are you and your husband still keeping all right?
Yeah, we're not so bad. I've got a very big painful eye at the moment, so I can't see you properly.
As long as you can hear me, Norma.
Yeah,
Thank you very much for your lovely call, which will indeed be the last call of the evening. I'll be talking again in a Zoom meeting on Tuesday night at 8 o'clock on all of my platforms. I'll be talking about Ireland and our attitude towards Ireland historically and now contemporaneously. You can still get a signed copy of my first novel, Queensway. I'm nearly finished its sequel now. There it is there on the screen. If you write to info@georgegalloway.com and give me your details, I'll send you a signed, dedicated copy. But you can also get it on Amazon and Amazon Prime. But in that case, it will not, of course, be signed. It will come to you straight from them. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week at the same time in the same place for the mother of all talk shows and bring another viewer, another listener with you.